right, if everyone take your seat, we're ready to get started with Winlink for hospital communications. Good afternoon. My name is John Davis, WB4QDX. I'm the Assistant Section Emergency Coordinator for Digital Communications. We've got Brett, W4HBS, who's our ASCC for Public Health. And we've got several helpers in the room. Helpers, all raise your hand. During today, if you have any questions, we're not going to be dealing with hardware as much in this session, but if we're referring to something that might be software related, the Winlink program, raise your hand and one of these guys will come around and help you. As I said, today we're not going to be dealing with basic Winlink operation. Hopefully you were able to attend one of our earlier sessions on that. If not, we actually will have a video soon of our last session. So we'll have that available to you if you need some additional information on that. For hospital communications, it's a little bit more unique than what you will find with using Winlink and digital communications in general for some of the other served agencies. But Winlink is probably the primary application that you will see utilized in hospital communications for several reasons. Number one, it has very extensive messaging capabilities. You can not only email to amateur stations, between amateur stations, but also to regular SMTP internet addresses. What you will see that hospitals use quite a bit are ICS forms. This is the incident command system. This is a standardization of communications, and probably the one you will get the most familiar with is the ICS 213 form. There are others. We'll talk about some of those as well. A feature that has been added to Winlink over the last year or so is the ability for Winlink to tell you it needs to be updated. So if you start the program and then in a few seconds you see, would you like to upgrade to version XYZ? You should do that. The thing that you will almost see with, if you haven't been in Open Winlink in a couple of days, you will almost always see a message that comes up and says, your forms library has been upgraded to a certain version. Because all of the forms, as they are modified or added, they get upgraded, and that automatically loads as well. And that gives you a complete form library. Another thing is you can use so many different methods to send and receive Winlink messages. One is Telnet, basic internet connection. VHF, UHF packet, including going through digipeaters. You can use HF if you're out of range of digipeters or packet gateways. And you can also go peer-to-peer, point to point, from one station to another station. So that makes Winlink very, very flexible. Now, this is one of those did you know tips. You can access your Winlink email without installing the program. Let's say you're out on another computer or you're at a computer at your served agency and you need to check your Winlink email. Go to your favorite browser, whether it be Chrome or Internet Explorer, Firefox, whatever. Go to webmail.winlink.org, and it's an HTTPS. And unfortunately, you need to put the 446 on the end, which is kind of redundant with HTTPS, but it wants that. And then log in using your call sign and your Winlink password, and it gives you a browser-based version of your Winlink mail. So that allows you to check your mail without having to be on a computer with the program itself. For those of you, let me just ask the question. Yes, sir? Go back to that last slide just a moment. For the address, webmail, HTTPS, webmail.winlink.org:446.
Thank you.
For setting up Winlink Express, you're probably already set up here. But just to make sure that you've got all the important things that are filled out here, you make sure it's your call sign and password, and I'm going to give you some additional information on passwords. Your password recovery email, which is a non-winlink.org, it could be your Gmail, yahoo.com, whatever email address. Your grid square and all the name information on the right. I put this in there because I always like to check this box. Again, it's kind of a personal preference thing, but if you check this box that you're saying display a list of pending incoming messages prior to downloading, what does that give you? You may have 10 email messages coming in. You may be on a very slow connection. So you may not want to download all of those. Some of them may have attachments, and it would take a long time. If you have this box checked, it first gives you a list of those incoming messages, and you can select one or more of those that you want to download. If you're always on a faster connection, it's really not going to make that much difference. They'll automatically come in. Otherwise, that can be a handy tool. So the only other thing I'm going to mention is related to passwords. And then also, you've probably heard from the other Winlink sessions, or you already know about this, the propagation program, ITSF, I always missay this, I think it's ITSHF program for propagation modeling. And that helps you, if you're on HF with Winmore, to find the station that has the highest probability that you will successfully connect to. So you need to tell it where that program is, and by default, it just installs on its own folder on the C drive. And that's the basics for that. Now, a note on passwords, and this is very, very important because come February 1st, there are going to be a lot of people screaming, I can't get into Winlink, it doesn't like my password. In the past, well, in the early days of Winlink, you didn't even have a password. You could put one in, but you didn't have to have it. Then it was required that you put a password in. What you didn't probably realize in that is that it was converting whatever password you put into uppercase. You may have entered it totally in lowercase, but it displayed it as uppercase. And that was okay, because it just assumed everything was uppercase or converted it. On January 31st of this year, the Winlink organization is allowing you to have upper, lower, or mixed case passwords. Now the problem is you may not know whether you entered your original password as uppercase or lowercase or exactly what. So what I strongly suggest you do before the end of this month, when you go home tonight, is a great time to do it. Go out to winlink.org, go to My Account, and enter your password in all caps. The login is going to be your call sign, and the password that you have used, it's in your program, and you can display that, remember, from the previous one under Show Password, so you can see what your password has been. And you're going to enter it in all caps. Then you can change it to whatever you want. If you want to leave it in all caps, but you have to enter it as all caps. If you want to do it mixed, whatever you want. It's a great time to change your password as well. But you want to make sure that after you do that on the winlink.org site, that you go back to your program and change it here to make sure they match. It's going to be February 1st, and people are going to be calling saying, I can't get into Winlink. Go ahead and do this and avoid the hassles. Most of you are probably already familiar with the main Winlink program and the look and feel of it. Can everyone, well, first off, how many have attended the Winlink class today, one of our earlier ones? If you did not attend the class today, are you already experienced with Winlink? Is there anyone who is coming into this and say, I haven't had the opportunity to use Winlink yet? Don't be afraid to raise your hand. I'm not seeing anyone, so that's a great sign. You're already, okay. But you're going home and you're going to learn how to do this, right? Good. But that's okay. But for those of you who've had some experience with it, you know this screen. It's how you access your messages. You see all the normal stuff, the inbox, outbox, sent items, deleted items, etc. You also know how to select a new message. You probably or hopefully have had some experience at using forms. So either sending 213 forms, regular email messages, any kind of messaging and all variations of that. Are there any questions, high-level questions at this point on that we can answer concerning just Winlink, the basics of Winlink? All right, good. I keep wanting to lay my hands all over this mouse pad. All right, remember there's several ways to do this. The simplest way is Telnet. If you have an internet connection, use it. Not every situation where you're going to be asked to participate in a hospital or some public health facility is going to be in a situation where the internet is not available. Use it. It's simple. It's generally higher speed, so don't be afraid to use it. So there you're selecting it as a Winlink Telnet connection. T&Cs. This is probably the second most popular way of doing it. If you're going through a VHF or a UHF gateway, you're going to be using a packet mode. A lot of people will use T&Cs to be able to do that. You're either going direct to a gateway or you're relaying through a digipeater, which all it is repeating it until it gets to the gateway. And here's where some people will make some mistakes in their setup. If you're going direct, as it says here, all you need to enter is the gateway. For example, we have running in here, I've got an RMS gateway running in the room here as WB4QDX-5 on 145.590. So if you are in your Winlink program connected to a radio and sent directly to WB4QDX-5, your message would go out and you would retrieve any messages that are incoming to you. Now, if you are not within range of the gateway itself but have to loop through a digipeater to get there, then you need to change this to digipeater, put the gateway address in here, for example, WB4QDX-5, and then you will put the call sign and SSID of the digipeater itself. For example, I live in Gwinnett County. We have 3 digipeaters, WX4NET-6, -7, and -8. So when someone wants to get to my gateway, which is at home, WB4QDX-10, they enter it as WB4QDX-10, configured as a digipeater, via WX4NET-6, 7, or 8. That repeats through the digipeater to get to the gateway. So those are the most common errors that people will make in setting that up. Signallink, how many of you are familiar with Signallinks? Wonderful little device because they not only work well for this mode for digital, but many other digital modes as well. If you're using PSK or some of the other digital modes in FLDigi, wonderful little device to use. Now with the Signallink, the only thing you have to worry about with it is that Winlink can't speak packet directly to your sound card. So Signallink being a sound card, you need a piece of software in between. One I like very well is the sound modem software from misspelled call sign here, UZ7HO, that actually generates the packet tones to go into a Signallink. So it kind of sits between Winlink and the Signallink, but it works just fine. And that allows you with a Signallink to use other digital modes as well. We talked about HF. HF can be a little more complicated. It can be a little finicky based on propagation. What can I get to? A couple of things to remember, and we'll go over this a little bit later as well in some of our best practices, is that you need to update your list of channels. And you do this within the form here to be able to update your list of Winlink HF gateway stations. That may take a little while. I recommend that you do that while you're on the internet, maybe before you get called out, or periodically just do that so you have a current list. Then, in using the software, it will allow you it will give you a prediction of what is the gateway that you are most likely to hit successfully. It'll give you a percentage, it'll give you the distance, it'll give you the frequency, and then it will tune your radio even as well. So that works out very well. The other thing which we'll spend a little more time on is audio levels. Especially on HF, you need to make sure that your transmit and receive levels are set correctly. And we'll talk about this a lot more, but while we have this up here, if you'll notice this bar, that when you are receiving a signal, you need to adjust either your Signallink receive volume or in your radio itself, where that this top bar falls within the green area. And then you have a good quality, properly adjusted receive signal. On transmit, and we'll spend a little more time on this, you use the metering on your HF rig, and you need to watch very carefully the ALC. You want to always adjust your transmit level to where you are. If you see any ALC indication, you've gone too far. Your transmit level is too high. You want to take that down to where I call it, you're just tickling the ALC. Barely see an indication, and then maybe back off just a little bit, where you're just under that. And that makes sure you have plenty of transmit audio, but you're not getting into automatic level control, which causes distortion, which causes additional retries of sending the message, or you may not get through at all. Very, very important. And we'll re-emphasize that point a little bit later as well. Now let's talk about some best practices, because hospital environments are unique, and probably no two are alike. Wouldn't you say that? So you may have different facilities available to you. You may have different radios available to you. You may have different levels of personnel that you are working with, and it may be that they have differences in how they're used to operating, using the ICS structure. All of these things come into play. So the important thing is you need to be prepared. First thing I'll say is when you arrive, there's certain things you should go through and make sure you're set up and ready to go. One is the internet available? Like I said before, don't be afraid to use Telnet. It's not embarrassing that you're a radio operator and you're not using the radio at that moment. There may come a time that you need to, but while it's available, use it. Packet. If you are within range of digipeters and gateways, you need to know which ones are accessible in your area and at your location. You can test that. On the Georgia Aries website, we have a list of digipeters and gateways that is always being updated, but that will also give you a map to show you where these are located, and those are the ones you should try. So when you arrive, you need to test that out. What digipeters and gateways can I hit? So that when you're called to send and receive messages, you're ready to go. If you're operating HF with Winmore, again, confirm we have several gateways, HF gateways within the state, but you may have a higher percentage of success with one that's outside of the state, depending on the band you're operating in and the propagation conditions. So the program will tell you this information. I have a 100% chance of connecting to this one on 10 meters, but I don't have a 10-meter antenna. So I have a 95% chance of connecting to this one on 80 meters. What do you think you're going to be most successful? Okay, I've got an antenna rig that will do the 80-meter band. Very high probability, let's use that. All right, let's say you're not really able to hit any other stations, other gateway stations, but I can go point to point to a neighboring facility, a neighboring hospital, and they may be able to get out a message from there and relay a message. So using point to point, that is a mode within Winlink. Don't be afraid to use it. We have some standard Georgia Aries frequencies on 80 meters, 3583 and 7083. Is that right? Is that one just a... No, that's a digital frequency. That's right. I got to think in 40-meter band because 7070 is a very popular one for PSK. So 7083 is the 40 meter digital frequency, 80 meters 3583. Power. Yes, sir.
I'm certain this is well known, but when you're describing which frequencies to use, I assume this is all upper sideband?
No, it depends. Well, in digital, yes, it's upper sideband. And in some radios, keep in mind you have to go upper sideband digital mode. I know on the two HF radios that I have, the ICOMs, I have to make sure that I'm upper sideband data to be able to use the connectors on the back, the data connectors on the back of the radio. So yes, that is an odd thing. Where both 40 meters and 80 meters are lower sideband for voice. For digital, they're upper sideband. That's a good point. Power. More is not better. You should never have to use more than 50 watts. In fact, in a digital mode, using more than 50 watts can actually damage your radio because of the power density of a digital signal. Typically, you're going to be operating in the 20-25 watt range. My station, I've talked all over the world on 20-25 watts. I've been as high as 35 watts, but that's a rare situation. If you think you need more than that power, you've got other problems. Either the propagation of the band is horrible at that point, something wrong with your antenna, coax, other reasons. You should never be operating any higher than 50 watts and expect the best results at 25 to 30 watts. Now, someone mentioned in the last session, and I have observed this as well, so it's something you need to keep in mind. Let's say that I've been operating at 10 watts. Propagation has changed a little bit and I need to move up to 25 watts. Another thing you need to check at that point is I'm going to need to adjust my transmit level, my transmit audio level. Because when I go to the higher power, I probably need to boost the audio level again. That may be as simple as on the Signallink changing the TX volume control, or it may be a setting in the radio. But again, you want to make sure you go up and tickle where you just see a little bit of ALC, and you can stay right there or back off very slightly. If you're seeing a lot of ALC coming into play, your signal isn't going to go through. It's going to be so distorted it isn't going to be receivable. So keep that in mind, very important. This may seem like common sense, but if you change bands, you need to retune, right? If you've got a tuner on it, you need to retune and verify again that transmit audio level to make sure that that's not too high or too low. Mike?
John, if we're working a 12-hour shift at a hospital and we're using Winmore, how often should we recheck our propagation to make sure that we're getting the best HF?
Well, how often do band conditions change? Generally, a lot of it you can go by the time of day. That you know it very predictably that 80 meters is going to be dead from late morning through mid-afternoon or so, close to sundown. 40 meters is going to be very long. But again, if you're using Winmore and HF Gateway, you may have better luck on 40 meters connecting with a station in Oklahoma. But you get through. Then at night, 80 meters is going to come in. So a lot of it is going to be following the standard rules that you see for propagation. But I would, as a kind of a rule of thumb, I don't know if there is one, but I would say at least hourly you ought to be checking to see if band conditions have changed. I mean, these are the things that we can very easily forget, but they're typical operating conditions that we know, but they're easily overlooked. So again, make sure you're going to be changing bands. Retune. Make sure you're tuned there and check that your audio levels are correct with the AGC. Is Winlink ready to go? Remember I said that the most recent versions of Winlink for the last period of time, I don't remember exactly when it started, automatically checks and see if you're on the latest level. So after 30 seconds to a couple of minutes, you may see a message pop up that says the latest version of Winlink is X.X.X. Would you like to upgrade? Do it. It'll do it. It'll close the program, open it back up. Easy to do. What you're more likely to see, because this changes a lot, is this message here. Winlink Express standard forms were updated to version something or another. Forms change, they are sent with Winlink, and when they're updated, it says, you don't have the latest forms. Now, I'll give you a caution here, because I don't think I cover it later. If you remember in Winlink, you have the ability to save some of your favorite forms. You have the global favorites, and then you have, I think it has your call sign, like it would say WB4QDX favorites or something like that. If I save a program there, and then that form gets updated, I may not be on the latest version. While you may have some special forms you want to keep there, be careful with that, because that form may have been upgraded. Can you imagine it's one that's used a lot and then it gets upgraded and you're trying to use the old version? So stick to the standard ones as much as you can. They're so easy to pull down. Most of them are going to be in two places, under Georgia State ARIES forms, which those are transmitted with every Winlink form and updated. And the second one are the ICS forms. And that's where you're going to find your 213, which is the heartbeat of forms that you will send. Another thing that you want to do is verify that your call sign is set up in Winlink. Send a test message to someone. Send it to your internet email address. See if you get the message. Make sure that it's still operating. For some reason, it may have been canceled. It may be inactive, whatever the case may be. Make sure that it's operating. And also verify that you have the ability to print forms and messages. Having that on site is invaluable, because how do you give your message to your served agency, to the hospital staff? If you can print it, that's perfect. Any questions? All right. I like this. Forms rule the world. You got to be able to send and receive forms. As I said before, the most common forms used are in the standard templates. You see that when you open that list, when you expand that list, you see Georgia State forms, and that's where we have the 309 log sheet. And then down under the ICS forms, you see 213, 214, all of the common forms that you will use. So that's very important that you keep these. If I go down this list further, which would have been below, I would see the one that says WB4QDX forms. And that would be where I've stored some of my favorites. Now, you may have a custom form that's only used in your area. And if so, that'd be a good place to keep it. But for most of these, you want to use the latest and greatest common form that is used. So be careful of any that you are saving in your favorites. The ICS 213, this is the workhorse. This is the backbone of our messaging. People that are new to public health communications say, why aren't we using ARRL radiograms? Well, the main problem with that is we know it as hams. A surprising number of us don't know it as hams. But those who are experienced with sending and receiving messages over the years have used the ARRL radiogram. But it is not appropriate for in a emergency or public health type environment, because you need to have things like who is it going to, what's the incident name, who is it from, and this is not you as the ham in that station or the guy at the other end. These are the positions. You may be sending it to Dr. XYZ and from Administrator XYZ. Subject to message, approved by, title, and if you're using this in Winlink, it forces you to complete all of the fields. If you leave it out, it will nag you and say you need to enter something in this field. So this is the form that you will most commonly use. Now we'll talk about some best practices in a minute, but you need to make sure that when someone is handing you a form, it may be handwritten, it may be typed if you're very, very lucky, but you need to make sure that all the information is in there so that you have the information to be able to send and the form and get a response properly.
The one thing to mention is there's also in the forms list, you'll see forms called HICS 213, HICS, which is the Hospital Incident Command System. And the reason I mention this is because people have actually sent, during our hospital net, they've sent their 213 as a HICS form. Do not send a HICS form because the hospitals are using the standard ICS 213, not the Hospital Incident Command forms.
Good point. Now, when you are sending and receiving forms, what's the procedure that's going to happen? You're probably going to be, well, it's interesting, and I go back just 2 or 3 years ago, we were doing an SET, and we did it with our local public health organization. We were, in our areas, people were very familiar with the ICS 213 form. The public health people were not. It was amazing at that point. Even though the ICS system, the Incident Command System, was, kind of as a result of 9/11, and if not, at that point it was adopted because we needed a common way, a standardized way to communicate. And yet it was surprising that a lot of the public health people did not know how to use these forms. So during this SET where we were communicating with them, it was almost like we had to do a little training of our own. This is what the form we want you to use when you want to send a message between point A and point B. So the important thing is when they bring you that form to send, make sure that the form is complete. Remember I said Winlink wants to nag you if you leave off certain fields? Make sure that that information is complete before they walk away from you. Because they're going to be in a hurry. They're going to come to you, send this form, out the door. Before they get away, say, hold on here just a minute, let me make sure this is good and go over it with you. Yes, sir.
Okay, well that happens during an exercise. Typically a runner gives you that form.
Could be, yes.
Okay, the runner probably does not know what goes in that form if it's not properly filled out.
But he does know who gave it to him.
Send it back.
Yes.
That means it gets sent back.
Yes. Yeah, did everyone hear that? A lot of times there'll be a runner who's bringing you the forms. And that runner, you may, when he comes up to you, grab him. Don't let him get away. Grab him by the shirt and say, let me look at this. If I got everything on here, oh, this is incomplete. I don't know who this is going to. Well, they may not know as the runner. Take this back and have them, this is missing. This information is missing. Back here?
Now make sure that thing's legible. I work with doctors, foremen, and everybody in between. Make sure it's legible. Just tracking somebody down, near impossible.
That is the point to determine that when they hand you that message. Determine, is it legible? Can you read it? Do you understand it? Because you're either going to do one of two things. You're going to transcribe that to the form, or you're going to try to send that form, and if they can't read it, because you couldn't read it, and they're not going to be able to read it. So that's a very important point. We had another comment over here.
Yeah, I don't know if it's appropriate for this one. Brett, are you over here?
Brett's here.
Yeah, I can't see that. I don't know how many of us are actually in hospital but how often are we expected to run a drill with the hospital personnel practice?
Every time.
Every what?
Every drill. You're going to be working with hospital personnel. Maybe I didn't understand your question.
I'll ask you later. I don't think I've been in that many.
Well, it's kind of a new world out there. I know for For those of you who may have been working with public health and hospital organizations back 2 or 3 years ago, it was kind of hard to get their attention. You're who? What can you do for me? Well, now they are, I don't know any other way to put it, they're forced to come up with an alternate means of communications. And we're that best shot for them. So suddenly a lot of doors have been opened. What do you need? Because we have a chance of losing a lot of money and funding if we're not compliant with this. But on the other hand, we need to provide value. We need to be that source that can deliver those messages for them, because that's what they're using us for. We're backup communications. Another thing to keep in mind on this is HIPAA, privacy. You are sending information over an insecure channel. It's not encrypted. Anyone is capable of receiving this information in some form, because the equipment to decode these transmissions is readily available. So the same thing in voice, where you wouldn't be transmitting a patient's personal information. You certainly wouldn't want to do that in a message, in a digital message. Assume without question that all transmissions are insecure. And it is your responsibility as the operator to ensure that that type of information is not being transmitted. If you have any questions about that, what would be the best resource to use to make sure?
They need to question their emergency manager at the hospital or the incident command.
So if you have any question about whether information is appropriate to be sent, contact whoever the incident commander is at the hospital or the person that has been designated as the emergency communication or emergency manager. But do not make a judgment that, well, I'm not sure, I'll let it go, because it's on your shoulders as well. Yes, sir.
I know that it's a hot topic, and there's been a lot of argument nationwide on exactly that issue. There are some loopholes in the legislation that have been discussed that might cover you. If it's really an emergency, a life or death thing, remember the FCC rules say you can always break the rules if it's life or death. The question would be, can you prove it's life or death? If you have shares systems, then you have encryption of L shares. So that, you know, the community moved using more of those.
You're correct. You know, if you do have another method that is considered secure, yes. But I think most of us are going to be working in an ARES-related environment and assume that it is not secure. Personally, I'm not a lawyer and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, so I don't know what any loopholes might be, and I don't want to be judging what those would be. Ask a question. Come back to them and say, is this HIPAA compliant? Is this appropriate to send? Yes, sir.
Yeah, the problem with I understand what you're saying about the FCC regs, but all they're saying is you can break their regs.
That's correct.
But HIPAA is not an FCC reg, it's its own entity.
That's right.
I wouldn't want to hang my head on that one.
Yeah, that HIPAA has nothing to do with the FCC. The FCC is saying you could transmit outside of your band. You could go grab a police radio if it was a matter of life and death, personal property. I forget what the three things are. I teach a ham-cram class and I can't think of the three things, but it's basically life and death situations, protection of property, or safety. So I have never been in a situation like that. I don't want to be, to have to make that judgment.
If you're using Winlink and you're using the internet connection, it's not going out over RF, would that be secure?
Can internet be hacked?
Okay, so then email's not a secure method?
No.
What's not?
Ask Equifax if going over the internet is secure. Yeah, I mean, you got to look at it that way. That was kind of a harsh answer on that, but just because you're sending it as an email over the internet, what if on the other end it then transitions to RF? You don't know the whole path of that entire message as it's going. It may have an RF path that is somewhere along the line, but even if it isn't, the internet is not secure.
John, I think this might be a question that would be good addressed by legal counsel, because my understanding, which could be wrong, HIPAA applies to medical personnel or people at insurance companies who have it. If I'm standing out on the street and somebody from a doctor's office comes out and hands me patient information, I can then give it to anybody in the world, and I'm not covered by HIPAA. They violated it by giving it to me, but once I have it in my hands, it's all new. So being in the hospital,
well, you got to remember that when you're serving the hospital as a communications staff. Now, if a doctor comes out and hands you a box of patient records out on the street, that's a little different situation. But you are acting on behalf of the hospital when you're there. So assume the most stringent application of the rules. I think that's your best course of action. If there's any question, talk to your hospital personnel there.
Well, they'll have a compliance officer at every hospital, and if there's a question, always get approval through the hospital personnel first. Because remember this, it's already been proven in court that if you err on the wrong side, it's you that will be fined, not the hospital. You are the operator, it's your name on that 213 that went out. So be aware, that's the challenge. Now there's a HIPAA class right after this one that will cover all this in depth. So if you have any questions, you can argue with the compliance officer that's teaching the class.
One more question.
I don't want to argue it. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal.
And I bet you didn't stay at a Holiday Inn either last night.
I know. And I think you're giving great advice. Doctors worry about this a little less than hams. I can just tell you from experience. We're very careful, but when life or death is at stake, it's a little different. May I point out that if you don't have shares available to you, you can break the FCC reg on encryption. No. And encrypt it. No.
I don't think that's true. I don't think on encryption. I think, and again, I'm not a regulatory attorney, and I'm not going to offer advice on that, but I think the intent of that FCC rule on that is that you may go operate outside of your band in the case of an emergency. In case of one of these conditions, you may operate, if you have to go, if you see a police officer injured and he has no way of communicating and you get on his police radio, the FCC, that's a situation where the FCC says, that's fine. But in some of these other situations, it's not we're probably not going to be in a life and death situation for the most part. Now, I may say that, and we have a hurricane that remains a Category 4 coming up through Georgia next year. And it may wreak havoc, and you're at a hospital that, or Puerto Rico, use the situation of Puerto Rico, where essentially the entire infrastructure of the country was disabled. I'm sure there were many situations there where people were making a lot of decisions based on the content of their messages. So most of the time we will not be confronted with that. I would just say use caution, use discretion, err on the side of being conservative with that. Final thing I'm going to say on this is on forms, print and log all your forms received. You've got the ICS 309 form to use as a log. Print your messages. You want a record of them, not only to give to the served agency personnel, but also for your records as well. So be very careful with that. Be very thorough with that. Attachments. This is a great capability within Winlink, but you got to keep in mind, for the most part, especially if RF is involved in this, it's a slow speed transmission mode. Packet 1200 baud. Over HF, it might be slower than that. Probably is slower than that. So the larger the attachment, the longer it's going to take to send that message. So they should be kept as low as possible. Now, two things to really think about with this. If you have a list, a text list, that, let's say somebody gives you a thumb drive and it's a list of things. That's a pretty small file. Use that as an attachment. Send it. It'll go pretty fast. If someone, let's say for example, I had this question come up earlier, an Excel file. An Excel file by itself has a lot of extra stuff in it. It's hard to find one that is small size, even if you're just using 2 or 3 columns and 25 names. Save it as a CSV. It becomes a text list, and send it that way. Now, I know in a lot of situations you're going to be handed, and we heard some examples of this, a handwritten form. First off, make sure it's legible. But then, do you have the ability, rather than retype that in, to scan that form and make it into a file? Some hospitals, you either have a copier that will do it and email it to you where you can get that, or a way to convert from paper to a scanned file. And if you can do that and send it as an attachment. And again, in this case, you can send that attachment of a form as a regular email. You don't have to open an ICS 213 and attach it to that. You can just send a regular message form and it will take an attachment, and that could be that scanned 213 form. Sometimes you may want a photo. And someone gave this as an example earlier. I take a picture of the form. Well, our smartphones have some pretty doggone good cameras in them now. 5 megapixel. That generates a pretty big file. So if you can change the resolution to the lowest possible, take a picture, or it may be a picture of something else that needs to be done. You'll notice in here there is, if I put an image file like a JPEG or a GIF in there, I can edit and resize that image. You will notice that's an option for you. And that will try to make that file smaller for transmission. So that's a way that you could do that. So use your options to make it the smallest file possible for transmission. Here's some essentials, best practices. I hear this on every exercise. I don't care whether it's a public health exercise or you're just staffing shelters or you're set up in a park. You call that remote location. Nobody answers. Never leave your station unmanned. You are the radio operator. Your first priority is to listen to that radio. It would be helpful if your location, if you had someone there with you that can be the liaison with others around you. But you've got to be listening to that radio. Back during the remnants of the hurricane, I remember hearing a lot of stations called. About 5 minutes later, they'd get a hold of them because they're back from the bathroom. But if you're the only one there, you need to let someone know that you're going to be off the air for a few minutes. And then let them know when you return. But never leave your station unmanned without notifying net control. When you are relieving someone, starting a new shift, relieving them from the previous shift, you need to receive a briefing. This is plain and simple incident command procedures. You need to know what happened before, what you need to know that's upcoming, and what to prepare for. And anything else, procedures, equipment specific issues, all of those things you need to do. And at the end of your shift, you do not leave until you have briefed your replacement. Boy, this seems like common sense stuff, doesn't it? But it is often so easily missed. Log all your traffic on the ICS 309 form for each shift and print that at the end of the shift or when you filled up the form. Rule of thumb, if it isn't logged, it didn't happen. You can't prove it. So you've got to do that. You've got to be very judicious in doing that. Voice. We've been concentrating on digital all day long. One more question?
Is there a copy of that log? You said keep a personal copy for yourself?
That would be good to do. Well, you definitely want to do for yourself. But if someone else requires a copy, but you definitely for yourself, because that's your station's log of what's going on. All right, most of the time, there's a VoiceNet component. Now, you may not have a digital station and you're only VoiceNet, but you want to make sure that you are monitoring that VoiceNet at all times. Now what happens if you're tuned to a VoiceNet, but you're also sending digital traffic, messages back and forth. When you need to send or receive a message, and I heard this so many times during the hurricane, request that you have a traffic for another station. They'll acknowledge that they're ready to receive that, and then when you send your traffic, then you can confirm they got the message. That sounds like overkill, but you're making sure that a message got through. Now, the procedure to do that is you may only have one radio that you're splitting between voice and digital traffic. If you need to go away and check for messages, Telnet control you're going to be off the VoiceNet for 5 minutes, whatever, and then let them know when you return. Check back in when they return. So that's real important that you be reachable at all times, and especially on voice, because that's your quick communication with you. And I don't know, I worked the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta Christmas Parade race just a few weeks ago. I don't know how many times you call a station, you call a station, you call a station. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to my radio. So those are the things that you've got to be very careful on. Don't forget about voice. We're always going to be experiencing problems. What are the most common problems that we run into in a hospital and public health environment? Talked about power, spent a lot of time about power. Less than 50 watts, 25 watts is usually ideal. I've worked as much as 35 watts, but beyond that, there's no benefit. Audio levels, they've got to be correct to ensure good reliability in transmissions. It's easier to do that on FM. I think in the last session someone was saying, how do you adjust your levels on, say, a 2-meter radio? A lot of that's done by ear. But on HF radios, you've got a definite way that you can adjust the receive and transmit audio levels. And they're probably a lot more critical there with band conditions, QRM, QSB, fading. So you need to watch that very, very carefully. On packet, if you're listening on the frequency, you can hear different stations. You can see when your own station is transmitting. So you know, if all of a sudden my station's transmitting and I'm at a much lower level, I need to boost my level somehow. If I'm running a Signallink or something like that, it's easy to do. So audio levels, probably one of the most common problems that you'll experience. Some things to remember. If you get to a location and you don't know how to use Winlink, you're not going to be as useful as you could be. Get familiar with it. We have plenty of opportunities to practice it. There's a weekly Georgia AriesNet on Sunday afternoons, usually about between 2 and 5 in the afternoon. If you'll send a Winlink message to WX4 GMA, then you can have practice sending that message, sending messages. There's some other nets around. There's also a lot of resources that can help you. I'll be glad to be one of those. Brett volunteered also. You've got our email addresses up here as well. There is a Georgia Aries digital Yahoo group. A lot of your questions can be answered on Winlink and other digital modes. So those are great opportunities to be able to practice. Question?
You
mentioned in the last session that the geography was underscored.
If I probably said that wrong, it is dash. I think it is. I could be wrong, but I think I copied this off as Georgia Aries dash digital. Try it both ways. If you go to Yahoo Groups and search for the group, it'll tell you the right one. It could be a typo. Was there another question over here? Okay, over here? Where's the question?
We need to sign the sheet.
Okay, yeah, make sure that you sign the sheet. If you have not, it's going around the room. All right, with that, we're kind of on the wrap up end. Any questions specific to the hospital environment that you have questions, other comments about? We are at a very critical point in our support of public health and hospital environments. It is an excellent opportunity to get involved with your local hospitals. It's kind of interesting that a couple of years ago they didn't want to give us the time of day, but suddenly they have a need for us, and it's an excellent opportunity to show our value to them. Be professional, be competent at what you're doing, and if you have any questions on this, ask the questions and practice. Any final comments? Brett, anything you'd like to say? Yes, sir.
When you speak of a digipeater, I'm aware of the APRS digipeater. Are we talking about something?
They're not the same, but they're very similar. A digipeater is a digital repeater. If it's tuned to 144.39, it's repeating position information. If you're on one of the other frequencies, we use 145.79 is popular in northwest Georgia, 145.59, kind of the northeast quarter of the metro area, and we need a whole lot more around. But they're actually repeating messages, more information than just your position.
Yeah, and the APRS is the next about 25, I believe it is, also gives you text capability. I know it's a separate
short message.
But could you use the same digipeater to transmit?
No, no, they would need to be separate. I know our club, for example, we've got an APRS digi on 144.39, but we also have a packet repeater on 145.59. Okay. Yeah, nary the two shall meet. Any other questions?
Say those frequencies a little bit slower.
You mean 144.39 and 145? I'm sorry. Messing with you, sorry. Yeah, you're talking about the packet frequencies that are used. In northwest Georgia, you'll see a lot on 145.79, 145.79. The northeast metro area, you'll see 145.59. I think I've seen some 145.75 around as well.
Isn't there a listing of all the lot of the
Yes. If you'll go to the Georgia Aries website under the digital tab, we've got access to a map and it'll show you all the frequencies. And we want to grow it. You know, one of the biggest weaknesses we have right now in terms of digipeaters is you get south of Atlanta, they are few and far between. So if you have access to some sites, we'll even help with the equipment to try to get help on that. I know we're going to be putting one up in the southeast corner of the state down around Waycross here over the next few months. That'll be at a very high site, both the digipeater and gateway, so that will help with communications there. One's going up on Stone Mountain also, so that'll kind of help out more of the east side of Atlanta. All right. If there are no other questions, no other comments, thank you so much for coming. Hope this has been helpful to you, and we've got a little time for the next session.